My coworker destroyed my life with gossip, so I let her destroy her own wedding. My coworker Selma was known for being a huge gossip queen, so I always kept my business away from her. But when I found myself in the bathroom at work with blood pouring down my legs, I needed help from someone. Anyone. And she just happened to walk in. She found me curled up on the stall floor, ugly crying about losing my baby. She knelt down without a word and just rubbed my back. "Please don't tell anyone," I begged. "I'm not ready for people to know." "I would never," she responded with a soft smile while calling the ambulance. I heard her tell people I just felt unwell as they were loading me in. I returned to work 2 days later, and our manager pulled me aside with that fake sympathy face. "I heard about your loss. Take all the time you need." My blood froze. I went to look for Selma, but she was conveniently absent. By noon, I'd gotten 7 thinking of you texts from coworkers I barely knew. The worst moment of my life became office entertainment. She even had the audacity to text asking if people knowing was overwhelming. I found out later she'd even decorated the story too, telling people I'd been trying for years and that she saved my life when she first found me. None of it was true. 2 months later, she got engaged. Her Instagram was nothing but quotes about trust and loyalty in relationships, while she posted countdowns to her big day. She even invited me to the wedding. I smiled and said yes. The thing was, she couldn't help herself. Even while planning her perfect wedding, she'd corner me at work fishing for drama. "Any gossip? Come on, you can trust me. I promise I won't tell anyone." The same promise she'd made before. 3 weeks before her wedding, I called my cousin Rachel. "I need a favor. It's going to sound crazy, but hear me out." Rachel laughed when I explained the plan. "After what she did to you? I'm in." What I didn't know was that Rachel was about to become the least of Selma's problems. 1 week before the wedding, I made sure we were alone in the break room. I kept checking my phone, acting nervous. "What's wrong?" she asked, practically salivating. "Nothing. I saw something, but I can't tell you." Her eyes lit up. "What? Tell me." "No, you'll tell everyone like you always do." "I swear on my marriage I won't say anything." I hesitated, looked around, then whispered, "I saw Rachel's husband at the Marriott downtown with Jessica." Jessica was another wedding guest. They were holding hands. "Oh my God. Please, I'm begging you, don't tell anyone." Rachel's fragile after her miscarriage. I grabbed her hands. "Promise me. Promise you won't say anything at your wedding." I promise, I promise," she said. The look in her eyes told me everything. This secret was too perfect, too juicy. She'd never be able to keep it. Her wedding day was beautiful. Garden venue, string lights, elegant flowers everywhere. I sat at table 7, watching her mingle during cocktail hour. I noticed her father-in-law recording everything on his phone for family who couldn't make it. Perfect. Within 20 minutes, I saw her pull her sister aside, whispering urgently. Then her college roommate, then her mother-in-law. By the time dinner started, I could track the rumor spreading through the room like wildfire. Each time she told it, it got worse. Rachel's husband holding hands became basically fucking in the hotel bar. By the time she got to table 4, she was claiming Jessica was pregnant with his baby. At table 6, she insisted they were planning to run away together tonight, that he'd already drained their bank account. "I have screenshots of their SXs," I heard her tell the bridesmaids, even though she definitely didn't. Rachel played her part perfectly, sitting at her table looking happy and in love with her husband, until the gossip reached them. The music stopped when Rachel's husband stood up. "Who the fuck is spreading lies about me?" Jessica's boyfriend was right behind him. "Yeah, someone just told me my girlfriend is having an affair?" Every finger in the room pointed at the bride. She stood there in her $10,000 dress, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Someone told me?" "Who?" Rachel demanded, tears streaming down her face. She was such a good actress. "Who told you these horrible lies about my husband?" She told me they were having threesomes," someone chimed in from table 3. "She said Jessica was pregnant," added another guest. The groom's face went from confused to horrified as he realized his new wife had spent their entire reception spreading increasingly insane lies about their guests. But the horror on his face was nothing compared to what came next. "You said you had screenshots," the maid of honor said slowly. "Show us the screenshots." The silence was deafening. That's when I noticed the groom's hands were shaking. Not from anger, from recognition. That's when the groom said something I'll never forget. Something that made everything worth it. And when Rachel's husband announced what he was going to do next, Selma's life as she knew it was over. I sat in my car outside the venue for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The engine was off, but I couldn't make myself drive yet. My phone kept lighting up on the passenger seat, text after text from numbers I recognized as wedding guests. I didn't look at them. The garden lights were still glowing behind me through the rearview mirror, and I could see people standing in small groups near the entrance, probably still talking about what just happened. My chest felt tight and my breathing was too fast. The plan worked exactly how I wanted it to, but watching Selma's face when everyone pointed at her, seeing the groom's hands shake, hearing Rachel's husband yell about lawyers, it all felt different from when I imagined it in my head. I finally started the car and drove home in the dark, keeping my phone screen down so I wouldn't see the messages piling up. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every single moment from the break room when I planted the fake rumor to Rachel's husband standing up and yelling, The look on Selma's face when everyone pointed at her kept flashing in my mind, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find words. It felt good in the moment, watching her squirm, but now I just felt hollow and jittery. My brain wouldn't shut off. I kept checking my phone every few minutes to see if anyone had figured out I was the one who started it all, if someone had connected the dots back to me. The texts kept coming in, mostly from people asking what happened or sharing their shock about the drama. Nobody seemed to suspect me. I finally gave up on sleep around 4 a.m. and just scrolled through my phone in the dark. By morning, my group chat with Rachel and her husband had 17 new messages. I scrolled through them fast, my heart beating hard. Rachel confirmed they were both totally fine, and actually several guests had privately messaged them to apologize for believing the rumors so quickly. Her husband wasn't playing around, though. He was genuinely mad about the whole thing and kept saying he wanted to follow through with legal action against Selma for spreading lies about him. I hadn't really thought about that part when I made the plan. I figured he'd just be mad at the wedding and then everyone would move on, but he was talking about defamation and getting a lawyer involved. Rachel tried to calm him down in the messages, but he kept saying Selma needed to face real consequences for what she did. I put my phone down and felt sick to my stomach. I forced myself to get ready for work Monday morning, moving through my routine like a robot. Selma would be gone on her honeymoon for 2 weeks, which meant I had time before facing her again. The office felt weird when I walked in, like I was carrying this heavy secret that changed how I saw everything. All these people around me had spread my miscarriage story 2 months ago, turning the worst moment of my life into break room gossip, and they were all just sitting at their desks like nothing happened. My manager walked past with his usual smile and asked how my weekend was. I said it was fine, and he kept walking, completely unaware of everything. Brooks from accounting stopped by my desk mid-morning holding 2 cups of coffee. He asked if I had a minute to talk privately, and I felt my stomach drop, wondering if he somehow knew what I did. We walked to an empty conference room and he closed the door behind us. He handed me one of the coffees and said he'd been thinking about something for a while. He told me he felt really uncomfortable about how fast my medical emergency became office gossip 2 months ago. Like within hours, everyone knew details about my miscarriage that should have been private. He said he clearly remembered Selma being the main source, telling people in the break room and adding details that made the story more dramatic. Then he said, if I ever needed someone to document what he heard, like for HR or something, he'd be willing to write it all down with dates and names of other people who were there. His offer caught me completely off guard. I hadn't planned to do anything official about what Selma did with my miscarriage story. The wedding revenge was supposed to be enough, my way of getting back at her without involving work. But sitting there with Brooks being genuinely supportive, offering to help me file a real complaint, I realized I actually had a solid workplace case that had nothing to do with the wedding drama. Selma violated my privacy by sharing my medical information without permission. That was wrong regardless of what happened at her wedding. I thanked Brooks and told him I'd think about it, my mind already racing through what that would mean. That afternoon, I sat at my desk trying to draft an email to HR. I wrote it 3 different times and deleted it 3 different times. The problem was figuring out how to separate the 2 things in my head. Selma actually did violate workplace rules by sharing my private medical information and making up details about it. That was real and wrong and something HR should know about. But I also just destroyed her wedding reception by tricking her into spreading fake rumors that made her look terrible in front of everyone she knows. If I filed an HR complaint now, the same week as her wedding disaster, would it look like I was just piling on? Would someone figure out I was behind both things? I closed the draft email again and decided to think about it more. Rachel called that evening, and we had our first real conversation about what actually happened. She admitted she felt powerful watching Selma squirm, and realized everyone knew she'd been lying. But she also felt uncomfortable with how many innocent people got caught up in everything. Jessica and her boyfriend didn't deserve to be part of our revenge plot, and even the groom seemed like he was just figuring out his new wife had serious problems. We talked for over an hour and agreed we needed to keep the sting operation completely confidential between us. We wouldn't even tell her husband the full truth about my role in planning it. As far as anyone else knew, someone told Selma a rumor, and she spread it on her own. That was the story we'd stick to. I spent Tuesday researching HR policies on my lunch break, sitting in my car so nobody would see what I was looking at. I found out that sharing someone's medical information without their consent is actually a serious workplace violation, and it doesn't matter when you report it. The 2-month gap between when it happened and now actually made sense because I needed time to process the trauma before having the emotional energy to file something formally. The more I read, the more solid this felt. I had a legitimate complaint that was completely separate from anything that happened at the wedding. Selma broke workplace rules and I had every right to report it. Wednesday brought a text from Selma that made my hands shake when I saw her name on my screen. She was asking if I enjoyed the wedding, which seemed like a weird question given how it ended, and then she added this passive-aggressive comment about interesting drama from unexpected sources. I stared at the message for a long time but didn't respond. The fact that she was already trying to rewrite what happened in her head, like she was somehow the victim of mysterious drama instead of the person who caused it all by spreading lies, just confirmed everything I already knew about her. She couldn't help herself. She'd probably never change. I opened my work calendar Tuesday morning and blocked off an hour with Valerie in HR for Thursday afternoon. I kept the meeting title vague, just writing confidential discussion, so nobody scrolling past would know what it was about. My hands shook a little as I clicked send on the calendar invite. making this whole thing official in a way that felt both scary and necessary. Brooks stopped by my desk around 11, and I pulled him into an empty conference room to ask if he'd be willing to document what he remembered about Selma spreading my miscarriage story. He didn't even hesitate, just nodded and said he'd send me something by the end of day. His email arrived at 4:30, and I had to read it 3 times because of how detailed it was. He listed specific dates when he heard Selma talking about my bathroom emergency, named other coworkers who were present each time, and even included direct quotes of things she said, like how she supposedly saved my life and how I'd been trying to get pregnant for years. Seeing it all written out in bullet points made my stomach hurt because it proved how thoroughly she'd violated my privacy and how many people heard her lies. Brooks ended the email saying he was available as a witness if HR needed to interview him, and I felt grateful but also guilty that I was dragging him into this mess. Wednesday evening, I drove to Kendra's office for my first therapy appointment, which I'd booked 2 weeks ago right after the wedding. The waiting room had those generic nature paintings on the walls and a white noise machine that was supposed to be calming, but just made me more nervous. Kendra came out exactly on time and led me back to her office, which had better furniture than the waiting room and a box of tissues on every surface like she expected people to cry a lot. I sat on the couch and she settled into her chair with a notebook, asking me what brought me in today. I told her about the miscarriage first, keeping it factual about the bathroom emergency and the ambulance and coming back to work too soon. Then I explained how Selma promised not to tell anyone, but spread it around the office anyway, adding fake details that made her look like a hero. Kendra took notes but didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally to show she was listening. When I got to the wedding part, I left out some specifics about planting the rumor, but was honest that I'd orchestrated the whole thing to expose Selma publicly. I expected Kendra to look shocked or disappointed, but she just asked how I was feeling now that it was done. The question caught me off guard because I'd been so focused on whether the revenge was justified that I hadn't really checked in with how I actually felt. I admitted the wedding implosion was satisfying to watch, but that I'd been feeling hollow and weird ever since, like the revenge didn't fix anything the way I thought it would. Kendra asked what I meant by hollow, and I tried to explain that I spent 2 whole months planning how to punish Selma, instead of dealing with losing my pregnancy. The grief was still sitting there inside me, completely untouched, because I'd been too busy being angry to actually be sad. She asked what I needed now, and I realized I didn't have an answer, which made me feel lost in a different way than before. We spent the rest of the session talking about the difference between processing grief and avoiding it through anger, and Kendra suggested I try creating some space to actually mourn the baby I lost, instead of mixing it all up with Selma drama. Thursday morning, I woke up with my stomach in knots about the HR meeting, getting to work early so I could review Brooks's email one more time before heading to Valerie's office. The HR department was on the 3rd floor in a quiet section away from the main work areas, and Valerie's office had a door that closed for privacy. She greeted me professionally and gestured to the chair across from her desk, already having a notepad and pen ready. I started with the bathroom emergency, explaining how I was alone and bleeding and terrified, and how Selma walked in and found me on the floor. Valerie's face stayed neutral but kind as I described begging Selma not to tell anyone because I wasn't ready for people to know. I told her about Selma's promise and how she called the ambulance, then coming back to work 2 days later to find my manager, and half the office already knew everything. Valerie took notes and asked clarifying questions about timeline and who specifically had contacted me with sympathy messages. She didn't make me feel dramatic or petty for being upset, just treated it like a serious workplace issue that deserved attention. When I mentioned the fake details Selma added about me trying for years and her saving my life, Valerie underlined something in her notes and asked if I'd told Selma any of those things. I confirmed I absolutely hadn't, that I'd barely spoken 2 sentences before the ambulance arrived. Valerie looked up from her notepad and asked if anything else had happened recently between Selma and me, and I felt my face get hot immediately. I mentioned we were both at her wedding last weekend but kept it vague, saying there was some drama with other guests that didn't involve me directly. It wasn't quite a lie, but it definitely wasn't the full truth either, and I could tell from Valerie's expression she was filing that information away, even though she didn't push for details. She explained that HR would need to interview Selma and potentially other coworkers who heard her spread the information, walking me through what the investigation process would look like. The whole thing would be confidential but not invisible, meaning Selma would definitely know I filed a complaint even though the specific details of our conversations would stay private. Valerie emphasized that sharing someone's medical information without consent is taken seriously regardless of any personal conflicts we might have, which made me feel both validated and nervous about what came next. I left her office feeling like I'd done something important but also anxious about the paper trail I'd just created. The wedding revenge was one chaotic night that people would eventually forget, but this HR complaint was going into official records that would follow both Selma and me professionally. Friday afternoon brought a text from Rachel's husband while I was trying to focus on actual work. He said his attorney had drafted a demand letter for Selma requiring a written apology and public retraction to all the wedding guests she'd lied to about him and Rachel. He wasn't actually filing a lawsuit yet, but wanted to establish the harm on record in case Selma tried to spin the story differently later. Reading his message made me feel guilty because my revenge plan had created real legal consequences for people beyond just Selma, and I hadn't fully thought through how far the damage would spread. The weekend dragged by with my brain refusing to shut off about what would happen next week. Selma was coming back from her honeymoon Monday, and by Tuesday or Wednesday, HR would probably call her in to discuss my complaint. I kept imagining her face when she realized I was coming at her through official channels now, after she probably thought the wedding disaster was the worst of it. Saturday night, I barely slept, running through different scenarios of how she might react, or what she might say to try to minimize what she'd done. Sunday afternoon, I finally pulled out my journal, which I hadn't touched since before the bathroom emergency. Kendra had suggested creating space for grief that wasn't all mixed up with anger at Selma, and I figured writing might help separate the two things. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and started writing about the baby I'd lost, just letting myself be sad about what actually happened instead of focusing on Selma's betrayal. The words came slowly at first because I'd spent so long avoiding this particular pain, but once I started, I filled 6 pages about what it felt like to lose a pregnancy I hadn't even told anyone about yet. Writing about the baby felt different from planning revenge, harder and more honest, like I was finally letting myself feel the actual loss instead of just the anger about how people found out. My hand cramped from gripping the pen too hard, and I had to stop twice to get more tissues, but by the time I finished, something felt lighter, even though I'd been crying the whole time. Monday morning brought the strange reality of seeing Selma back at her desk with a choppy new haircut that looked like she'd cut it herself in a hotel bathroom. She posted honeymoon photos to her social media throughout the morning, all sunset beaches and champagne glasses, but her smile looked tight in every single picture. I caught her glancing at me twice from across the office, then quickly looking away when our eyes met. The avoidance was actually a relief because I had no idea what I'd say if she walked over and tried to make small talk like nothing had happened. The office felt different in a way I couldn't quite pin down, like everyone was being extra careful about what they said and who they said it to. Even the usual Monday morning gossip session in the break room was quiet, just people making coffee and checking their phones without the normal chatter. I wondered if I was imagining the tension, or if other people felt it too, this weird heaviness hanging over everything since the wedding disaster. Tuesday afternoon, I was at my desk trying to focus on a spreadsheet when I saw Selma get called into the big conference room at the end of the hall. Valerie was there with another woman I recognized as a senior HR rep from the main office downtown. Selma looked confused walking in, her eyebrows pulled together like she was trying to figure out what this was about. I forced myself to look back at my computer screen and pretend to work, but I kept checking the clock as 40 minutes crawled by. When Selma finally came out, her face was red and blotchy like she'd been crying or maybe yelling. Her jaw was so tight I could see the muscle jumping, and she grabbed her bag from her desk without saying a word to anyone. She left through the side door instead of the main entrance, and I watched her practically run to her car through the window. Wednesday morning brought an email from Valerie asking me to come to her office at 2 for a follow-up conversation about my complaint. I spent the whole morning feeling sick and jittery, checking the clock every 10 minutes and barely eating my lunch. When I finally walked into Valerie's office, she had a folder on her desk and gestured for me to sit down. She explained in this calm, professional voice that they'd completed the initial investigation and confirmed that Selma did share my medical information with multiple coworkers without my consent. Brooks's documentation was particularly helpful, she said, because he'd written down specific quotes and dates and names of other people who heard Selma talking. Valerie pulled out a printed timeline that showed how the information spread through the office over just 2 days, and seeing it laid out like that made the violation feel more real and serious than it had in my head. She walked me through the interview process, explaining that they'd talked to Selma, Brooks, and 3 other coworkers who'd heard various versions of my miscarriage story. Valerie told me that Selma initially tried to minimize what she'd done, claiming she only told a few people out of concern for my well-being after such a scary medical emergency. But when Valerie confronted her with specific examples of the embellished details she'd added, things got more complicated. Selma couldn't explain why concern for my well-being meant telling people I'd been trying for years to get pregnant when that wasn't true. She couldn't justify adding dramatic details about saving my life, or making it sound like I was on the verge of death when I wasn't. The lies and exaggerations actually made the violation worse, Valerie explained, because they showed Selma wasn't just sharing information out of worry, but was actively creating a more dramatic story for entertainment value. The outcome was a formal written warning that would go in Selma's permanent file, mandatory training on workplace privacy and professionalism that she'd have to complete within 30 days, and a directive that we maintain professional boundaries with no personal discussions at work. It wasn't termination, which part of me had secretly wanted, but Valerie explained it was proportionate to a first formal offense with no prior disciplinary history. Selma had never been written up before, and HR policy required progressive discipline unless the violation was severe enough to warrant immediate termination. Valerie also gave me some coaching about maintaining professionalism going forward, which stung a little until she clarified she wasn't disciplining me. She just wanted to make sure I understood that while my complaint was completely valid and they took it seriously, I needed to avoid any personal entanglements or confrontations with Selma, especially at work events or social gatherings. The way she said it made me wonder if she knew more about the wedding than she was letting on, if maybe someone had mentioned my presence there or connected some dots. Thursday brought news through the office gossip chain, which was much quieter now but still functioning. I heard from someone in accounting that Selma's groom had moved out of their apartment, and they were doing marriage counseling, though nobody was talking about divorce yet. The information came in this hushed, careful way, like people were suddenly aware that spreading personal details about coworkers might have consequences. I felt this complicated twist in my stomach, part satisfaction that my plan had worked, and part guilt knowing I'd contributed to serious problems in their marriage. They'd been married less than 2 weeks and he was already gone, sleeping on a friend's couch according to the rumor. Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica through social media, thanking me for being cool during all that wedding chaos. She said she appreciated that I didn't get involved in the drama or take sides, and she hoped we could still be friends despite everything that happened. Reading her genuine gratitude made me feel physically sick, because she had no idea I was the one who started it all. Her boyfriend had been humiliated in front of everyone, accused of cheating with screenshots that never existed, and their relationship was stressed because of rumors I invented and planted. Selma was the one who spread them and made them worse, but I was the one who created the lie in the first place. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back something neutral about being glad things worked out. My second therapy session with Kendra that evening focused on untangling justified anger from disproportionate revenge, which felt uncomfortably accurate. She asked me to separate what Selma actually did, sharing my medical crisis without consent, from what I did, creating an elaborate scenario designed to publicly humiliate her at the most important event of her life. Both things could be wrong even if one was a response to the other, she said. Selma violated my privacy and trust during the worst moment of my life, and that was genuinely harmful and wrong. But I responded by orchestrating a situation that destroyed her wedding reception, damaged her marriage, and involved multiple innocent people who got hurt in the process. Kendra didn't say I was a terrible person, but she did ask me to sit with the reality that I'd used other people as props in my revenge plan, without fully considering the harm it would cause them. I sit there in Kendra's office feeling the weight of what she just said about using people as props. The truth is, I knew exactly what Selma would do with that fake rumor because I've watched her operate for years. She can't help herself when she gets juicy information, and I counted on her making it worse with each telling. That was the whole point. But admitting that out loud to Kendra means admitting I deliberately involved Rachel and her husband and Jessica and her boyfriend in my revenge plan without really thinking about how it would affect them. I used Rachel's trust in me and her willingness to help, turned her marriage into a plot device, dragged Jessica into drama she had nothing to do with, all so I could watch Selma destroy herself publicly. The plan worked because I knew her worst trait and weaponized it, but success required hurting people who didn't deserve it. Kendra doesn't call me a terrible person, which I appreciate more than I can say. Instead, she asks what I need to do now to live with what happened, how I can move forward knowing what I did. The question sits heavy in the room between us. I realize sitting there that I need to apologize to the people I used even though I can't tell them the full truth about planting the rumor, without making everything exponentially worse. The wedding exposure already happened and can't be undone. Selma's marriage is damaged. The legal demand letter is sent. But I can at least own my part in the chaos to the people who trusted me and got caught in the fallout. Over the weekend, I draft careful messages to Rachel, her husband, Jessica, and Jessica's boyfriend. I write and delete and rewrite each one about 15 times trying to find the right words. I don't confess to inventing the rumor because that would open a whole new mess. But I apologize for any stress my involvement caused and acknowledge that the situation spiraled way out of control. I tell Rachel I'm sorry for putting her in that position at the wedding. Tell her husband I appreciate him being willing to help, but regret the public confrontation became necessary. Tell Jessica I'm sorry she got dragged into drama that had nothing to do with her. Hitting send on each message feels like stepping off a cliff. Rachel responds first on Sunday afternoon. Her message is understanding but includes this firm line that I completely deserve. She says she gets why I wanted Selma exposed and she's glad to have helped, but let's not do anything like this again. The boundary is clear and reasonable and makes me feel both grateful and ashamed. Her husband responds similarly, saying he's glad the truth about Selma came out, but he's done with dramatic confrontations. Jessica thanks me for the apology and says she knows I didn't start the rumors, which makes me feel worse than if she'd been angry. Jessica's boyfriend responds Monday morning with this confused message saying he doesn't think I did anything wrong, and he's just glad someone finally exposed what kind of person Selma is. He thanks me for being a good friend to Jessica during the whole mess. Reading his genuine gratitude while knowing I'm exactly the kind of person who manipulates situations for revenge makes my stomach hurt. He sees me as one of the good people who stood against Selma's lies when really I created the lies specifically so she would spread them and destroy herself. The irony sits thick and uncomfortable. He has no idea I planted the seed that grew into that whole disaster, that I'm the one who turned his girlfriend into a prop in my revenge plot. His message ends with him saying at least something good came from the wedding drama, because now everyone knows not to trust Selma with personal information. I stare at my phone not knowing how to respond. Monday of week 3 brings a surprising development that Rachel's husband texts me about. Selma's attorney responded to the demand letter with this carefully worded apology that acknowledges sharing inaccurate information at her wedding and apologizes for any distress caused. But the apology doesn't admit to intentional defamation or explain where the false information came from in the first place. It's the absolute minimum possible response, legally protective while appearing to take responsibility. Rachel's husband forwards me the actual letter, and I read through the lawyer language about misunderstandings and regrettable miscommunications. He tells me he's decided to accept the apology and drop the threat of litigation because dragging it out further isn't worth the stress. The written apology creates a paper trail if Selma tries to spin the story later, and that's enough for him. I feel relieved that the legal situation is resolving, but also guilty knowing my planted rumor created all this mess in the first place. Tuesday morning, I run into Selma in the bathroom, our first direct interaction since the HR investigation concluded. I'm washing my hands when she walks in, and we both freeze for a second. She looks at me with this expression mixing anger and something else I can't quite identify. Maybe suspicion, maybe resignation. She walks to the sink next to mine and says quietly that she knows I'm behind everything somehow, even if she can't prove it. Her voice is calm, but there's an edge underneath. I force my face to stay neutral and tell her we should both just focus on our work and move forward professionally. My heart is pounding, but I keep my hands steady under the water. She doesn't push the accusation, but as she's turning to leave, she adds that whoever told her about Rachel's husband at the Marriott must have been lying to set her up. The words make my pulse spike, and I feel heat rush to my face. I manage to say that maybe she should think about why she was so eager to spread unverified gossip at her own wedding in the first place. The response comes out sharper than I intended. She stares at me for a long moment, then leaves without saying anything else. I have to go sit in one of the stalls for 5 minutes, waiting for my hands to stop shaking and my heart rate to calm down. She's so close to figuring it out, but she can't quite connect all the pieces, and I don't know if that makes me feel safer or more anxious. Wednesday's therapy session with Kendra focuses on boundaries and what healthy accountability looks like moving forward. She points out that I took concrete steps to address Selma's workplace violation through proper HR channels, which demonstrates I can handle conflicts appropriately when I choose to. But I'm still carrying guilt about the wedding that I can't resolve through official processes, because admitting my role would create new problems for everyone involved. Kendra asks what would help me move forward with this unresolved guilt. I sit with the question, trying to find an honest answer. I realize what I actually need is to grieve the pregnancy I lost, instead of using anger at Selma as a distraction from that grief. The baby I was carrying for 8 weeks is gone, and no amount of revenge or HR complaints or legal demand letters changes that fundamental loss. I've spent months focused on punishing Selma when really I needed to process losing the pregnancy itself. Kendra suggests creating a private ritual to acknowledge what I lost. Something separate from anything involving Selma or work or other people. Just me and the grief I haven't let myself fully feel yet. Thursday brings an unexpected conversation with Brooks when he stops by my desk during lunch. He mentions the office gossip culture has noticeably shifted since Selma's HR warning became somewhat public knowledge. People are more careful about sharing personal information now, and there's less casual speculation about coworkers' private lives happening in the break room. He thinks something genuinely good came from me speaking up about the medical privacy violation. I nod and thank him for his support through the whole process. He has no idea the wedding disaster contributed to the culture shift too, that people are being more careful partly because they witnessed what happens when gossip spirals completely out of control. I let him think it was just the HR complaint that changed things because explaining the rest would require confessing to orchestrating public humiliation at someone's wedding. Brooks is being so genuine and supportive that adding that information would just make everything more complicated. The office really has changed though. He's right about that, even if the reasons are more tangled than he realizes. That evening, I pull out my laptop and start looking up information about memorial trees and what kind would grow best in my parents' backyard. I find a small maple that the nursery can deliver by Saturday, and I place the order before I can talk myself out of it. The act of choosing something real and permanent feels different from planning revenge or filing complaints. I text my mom asking if I can come over Saturday morning to plant something in the yard, and she responds immediately asking if I'm okay. I tell her I'll explain when I see her, and she says the yard is mine anytime I need it. Friday afternoon arrives, and I'm packing up my desk when my manager stops by looking uncomfortable in that way people do when they need to have a real conversation. He asks if I have a few minutes and gestures toward his office instead of just talking at my desk like he usually does. I follow him in, and he closes the door, which he never does for our usual surface-level check-ins about project deadlines and meeting schedules. He sits down across from me and takes a breath before speaking. I owe you an apology about how I handled your medical emergency when you came back to work, he says, and I can see he's actually thought about what he wants to say. I should have shut down the gossip immediately instead of just offering you empty platitudes about taking time. I wasn't expecting this level of honesty from him, and I don't really know what to say. He continues before I can figure out a response. I heard about the HR complaint, and I want you to know I think you were right to file it. What happened to you wasn't okay, and I failed to protect your privacy as your manager. I thank him and tell him I appreciate the acknowledgement, even though it doesn't change what happened. He nods and says he's committed to creating a better culture on our team going forward, and he hopes I'll feel comfortable coming to him if anything like this happens again. It's not some grand gesture that fixes everything, but it's more real accountability than I expected from someone in his position. The conversation only lasts about 10 minutes, but I leave his office feeling like something small has shifted in how seriously workplace boundaries are being taken. Week 4 settles into a new normal that feels strange but functional. Selma and I exist in this careful professional distance where we're civil in meetings and focus on our actual work without making personal conversation. We pass each other in hallways and nod without stopping to chat. We sit in the same conference room for team updates and take notes without making eye contact. It's not comfortable exactly, but it works in a way that lets us both do our jobs without constant tension. I catch myself watching her sometimes to see if she's going to corner someone for gossip like she used to, but she seems to be keeping to herself more. I don't know if that's genuine change or just self-preservation after the HR warning, but either way the difference is noticeable. Other coworkers seem to have picked up on the new dynamic too, and nobody tries to force us to interact beyond what's professionally necessary. I realize this might actually be the best possible outcome given everything that happened between us. We're never going to be friends, and we'll probably never have a real conversation about what she did or what I did, but we can coexist in the same workplace without it being a daily battle. Rachel calls Thursday evening while I'm making dinner, and I almost don't answer because I'm not sure I'm ready for another heavy conversation. But I pick up and she sounds genuinely happy in a way that makes me relax. She tells me that she and her husband are doing really well after everything, and if anything, the false accusations made them appreciate each other more. They've been talking more openly about their relationship and spending more quality time together, and she feels closer to him now than she did before the wedding chaos. I feel some of my guilt about involving them start to ease as she talks. She also mentions she's glad Selma faced consequences through the HR complaint, but hopes everyone can just move forward now instead of dwelling on the drama. I agree, and we talk for a few more minutes about normal life stuff before hanging up. It's the first conversation we've had in weeks that didn't revolve around Selma or revenge or legal letters, and it feels good to just be cousins again. My third therapy session with Kendra happens on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, and she wants to talk about the difference between justice and revenge. She asks me directly whether what I did at the wedding accomplished either one, and I have to sit with the question for a while before answering. She helps me see that the HR complaint was justice because it held Selma accountable through appropriate channels for a real workplace violation. There was a proper process with documentation and investigation and consequences that fit the offense. The wedding exposure was revenge because I used public humiliation to make her feel as exposed and violated as she made me feel. I wanted her to experience the same shame and powerlessness I felt when my private loss became office entertainment. Kendra doesn't tell me I'm a terrible person, but she does make me look at the distinction clearly. I admit that the revenge didn't actually make me feel better in any lasting way. It was satisfying for one night watching her face when everyone pointed at her and seeing her unable to explain where the screenshots were. But the next morning, I still woke up having lost my pregnancy, and that hollow feeling came back almost immediately. The HR complaint feels more solid because it created real boundaries and consequences through a proper process that might actually prevent her from doing this to someone else. Kendra asks if I can accept that both things happened and focus on moving forward, rather than spending energy justifying or condemning my past actions. I tell her I'm trying to get there, and she says that's enough for now. Saturday morning arrives cloudy and cool, and I drive to my parents' house with the small maple tree in my trunk. I texted them that I wanted to do this alone first, and they're respecting that by staying inside while I work. I choose a spot in the back corner of the yard where I can see it from the kitchen window, but it's not right in the middle of everything. I dig the hole slowly, even though the ground is soft from recent rain. My hands get dirty and my shoulders start to ache, but the physical work feels good in a way that sitting at my desk all week doesn't. When the hole is deep enough, I carefully lower the tree into place and start filling in the soil around the roots. That's when I let myself cry properly for the first time since the bathroom emergency at work. These aren't angry tears about Selma's betrayal or satisfied tears about her wedding disaster. These are genuine grief tears for the pregnancy that ended at 8 weeks and the baby I'll never meet. I sit on the ground next to the newly planted tree and cry until my chest hurts and my eyes are swollen. It hurts in a different way than the rage I've been carrying for months. This pain is cleaner somehow, more honest about what I actually lost instead of who I'm mad at. After about 20 minutes, my parents come out quietly and sit on the ground next to me. They don't try to fix anything or offer those empty platitudes people always say about things happening for a reason. They just sit with me in the sadness and let me feel it without trying to make it better. My mom reaches over and takes my hand, and we sit like that for a while watching the clouds move across the sky. Then she tells me something I never knew. She had a miscarriage between me and my younger brother. She was 12 weeks along and lost the baby suddenly just like I did. We talk about loss in a way that feels connecting rather than isolating. She doesn't compare our experiences or try to say she knows exactly how I feel, but she shares what it was like for her, and I share what it's been like for me. My dad listens quietly, and at one point mentions he felt helpless during my mom's miscarriage because he didn't know how to make the pain stop. We sit together in the backyard for over an hour just being a family that's experienced loss and survived it. Week 5 at work brings a small but meaningful change in how I spend my time. When people invite me to lunch groups that I know will turn into gossip sessions, I start declining politely. I'm not being antisocial or rude about it, but I'm more intentional about who I spend time with and what conversations I participate in. Brooks notices and starts inviting me to lunch with a smaller group of coworkers who mostly talk about their hobbies and weekend plans instead of dissecting everyone's personal business. I find myself actually enjoying these breaks instead of dreading them. There are a few other people in the office who seem to value privacy the same way I do now, and they become my main work friends. We grab coffee together and chat about projects and occasionally vent about normal work frustrations, but nobody tries to dig into anyone's personal life. It's refreshing after months of feeling like my private pain was public property. I notice I'm less tense at work when I'm not constantly worried about what information might get spread around. Selma seems to be making similar changes even though we never discuss it. She's keeping to herself more and not holding court in the break room like she used to. I see her eating lunch at her desk sometimes instead of gathering people around her for the latest drama updates. I don't know if it's genuine growth or just self-preservation after the HR warning and the wedding disaster, but either way, the office culture is noticeably different. People are more careful about what they share and who they share it with. The casual boundary violations that used to happen constantly have mostly stopped. Some people might think this makes the workplace less friendly, but I think it makes it more professional and actually safer for everyone. You can still be kind and supportive without knowing every detail of someone's private medical history or relationship problems. My fourth therapy session with Kendra starts with her asking what I want for myself beyond all the drama with Selma. I sit there for a full minute trying to think of an answer that isn't about work or revenge or processing what happened. She waits patiently while I realize I've spent the last few months so focused on the past that I haven't thought about my actual future at all. I tell her I used to have hobbies and interests before the miscarriage and the wedding disaster consumed everything. She asks me to list 3 things I enjoyed doing a year ago that I haven't done recently. Photography, hiking with friends, and taking cooking classes come to mind immediately. Kendra challenges me to pick one and actually do it this week. Not as therapy homework, but because I deserve to have parts of my life that aren't defined by pain or anger. I leave her office feeling lighter than I have in weeks. Like maybe there's a version of my life that exists beyond this mess. The next day at work, I'm scrolling through the company job board during lunch when I see an opening in the digital marketing team. I've always been interested in their projects but never thought about actually applying because I was comfortable in my current role. Now though, looking at the job description, I feel genuine excitement about the possibility of doing something new. It's not about running away from Selma or avoiding uncomfortable situations. It's about moving toward work that actually interests me and challenges me in ways my current position doesn't anymore. I draft an application email to my manager asking for his support, explaining that I'm interested in exploring new opportunities within the company. He responds within an hour saying he thinks it's a great move for my career growth, and he'll happily provide a reference. His support feels validating in a way that has nothing to do with the HR complaint or the drama, just genuine recognition of my work quality. Week 6 brings unexpected news through the office gossip chain that's noticeably quieter than it used to be. Someone mentions casually that Selma and her husband are doing couples counseling, but seem to be working through their issues. I feel this weird mix of relief and residual guilt hearing they're still together and trying to fix things. Part of me worried that my wedding stunt completely destroyed their marriage before it even started, turning me into someone who ruins lives just like Selma ruined my privacy. But they're both adults who are choosing to work on their relationship despite the rocky start, which isn't my responsibility to fix or feel guilty about forever. I didn't force her to spread those rumors at her own wedding. I just gave her the opportunity and she took it like I knew she would. The fact that they're in counseling means they're addressing real problems in how they communicate and trust each other, which probably needed to happen regardless of my involvement. Saturday afternoon, I meet Rachel at the coffee shop near her apartment. We order our drinks and sit outside where it's quiet enough to talk honestly about everything that happened. She tells me straight up that she understands why I did what I did after Selma violated my privacy so badly, but she's also really glad it's over, and we're not planning any more revenge schemes or elaborate stings. I apologize again for putting her in that position, for using her marriage as bait in my plan to expose Selma. Rachel accepts my apology but makes it clear she loves me and supports me, while also having firm boundaries about what she'll participate in going forward. She's not judging me for what I did, but she's also not signing up to be part of any future drama. I respect that completely and tell her so. We spend the rest of our time together talking about normal stuff like her work projects and my potential department transfer, and it feels good to just be cousins again instead of co-conspirators. My 5th therapy session with Kendra focuses on forgiveness, which feels harder than any of the previous topics we've covered. She asks if I can forgive Selma for sharing my medical crisis with the entire office. I tell her honestly that I'm not there yet, and might never be fully there. What Selma did was a serious violation during the worst moment of my life. But Kendra also asks if I can forgive myself for orchestrating such a calculated public humiliation at Selma's wedding. That question sits heavier because I'm still not sure how I feel about what I did. Kendra points out that I can acknowledge Selma's violation was wrong, while also acknowledging my response was way out of proportion to what she did. Holding both truths at the same time doesn't cancel either one out. It just means we're all complicated people who make choices we have to live with. She asks what accountability looks like for me now, and I realize filing the HR complaint was holding Selma accountable through proper channels. The wedding revenge was something else entirely, something that felt justified in the moment but looks more questionable with distance. That evening, I sit down at my kitchen table with a notebook and start writing a letter to Selma that I never planned to send. I write that what she did hurt me deeply and violated my trust during the absolute worst moment of my life. I write that turning my private medical emergency into office entertainment was cruel and showed she valued gossip more than basic human decency. But I also write that what I did was calculated to humiliate her publicly in front of everyone she cares about. I write that I involved innocent people like Rachel and her husband and Jessica and her boyfriend in a scheme designed to expose her at her own wedding. The letter goes on for 3 pages of me working through all the complicated feelings I have about the whole situation. Writing it out helps me see everything more clearly, even though Selma will never read these words. I fold the letter and put it in my desk drawer, a private record of everything I need to say, but can't. Week 7 brings the actual interview for the department transfer. I meet with the hiring manager in a conference room and we talk for 40 minutes about my current work and what I'd bring to the marketing team. She asks smart questions about my experience and seems genuinely interested in having me join them. I ask about the team culture and the kinds of projects they're working on, and her answers make me even more excited about the possibility. Whether I get the position or not, The whole process of pursuing something positive for my career feels like real progress. I'm not just surviving the drama with Selma anymore. I'm actively building towards something I actually want. The hiring manager says she'll let me know by the end of the week, and I leave the interview feeling proud of how I presented myself and my work. Thursday, I have lunch with Brooks at the sandwich place down the street from our office. We're talking about random work stuff when I mention I'm working on letting go of anger and focusing on my own growth instead of staying stuck in the past. Brooks tells me he's been impressed with how I've handled everything, both standing up for myself through proper HR channels and not letting the situation with Selma consume my whole life. His perspective helps me see that I can be proud of some of my choices, like filing the formal complaint, while still regretting others, like the wedding setup. Not everything has to be all good or all bad. I made some choices I'm comfortable with and some I'm still processing. Brooks mentions he's glad the office culture has shifted toward more privacy and professionalism, and I agree, even though I know my actions contributed to that shift in complicated ways. My 6th therapy session with Kendra is about putting all the pieces together into something I can actually live with going forward. She asks me to tell the whole story from beginning to end as one complete narrative instead of separate incidents I'm trying to forget or justify. I talk about losing the pregnancy and how scared and alone I felt in that bathroom. I talk about Selma's betrayal and how violated I felt when my private pain became public entertainment. I talk about the HR complaint and standing up for myself through official channels. I talk about the wedding revenge and how it felt both satisfying and hollow. I talk about trying to heal and move forward while still working in the same office as Selma. Kendra helps me see that all of it is part of my story now, not separate chapters I can ignore or pretend didn't happen. The grief and the violation and the revenge and the healing are all connected pieces of the same experience. She asks what I've learned about myself through everything that happened. I tell her I'm stronger than I thought I was, able to stand up for myself and hold people accountable when they hurt me. But I also learned I'm more capable of cruelty when I'm hurt than I ever wanted to believe about myself. I can file proper complaints through HR and handle things professionally. But I can also manipulate situations and use people's weaknesses against them when I feel justified enough. Both capacities exist in me at the same time. Moving forward means choosing which one to act on in any given situation. Kendra nods and says that self-awareness is the first step toward making better choices, and I hope she's right. Monday morning of week 8 brings the email I've been waiting for with the subject line, Department Transfer Approval. I read it 3 times at my desk to make sure it's real, then forward it to my personal email so I have a copy outside the work system. My manager stops by an hour later with a smile that seems more genuine than his usual office pleasantries. He tells me congratulations and says I've grown a lot over the past few months, which makes me feel both proud and weird considering what that growth involved. I thank him and mention I'm excited about the new role, which is true even though I'm also nervous about starting over with a different team. He says the other department is lucky to have me and asks if I need anything for the transition. I tell him I'm good, and he leaves, and I sit there feeling like I'm closing one chapter without entirely understanding what the next one will look like. The transfer starts in 2 weeks, which gives me time to wrap up current projects and mentally prepare for working in the same building as Selma, but on different floors with different people. It feels like the right amount of distance. Close enough that I'm not running away, but far enough that we won't be in each other's space every day. I spend the rest of Monday organizing files and making notes about what needs to be handed off before I leave this team. Tuesday afternoon, Valerie from HR sends a meeting request for Wednesday morning with the subject line, follow-up discussion. I accept it and spend Tuesday evening wondering if there's a problem or if it's just routine. Wednesday morning, I head to her office at 9 and she greets me with her usual professional warmth that somehow makes difficult conversations feel less threatening. She asks how I'm doing and whether I've had any issues with Selma since the investigation concluded. I tell her honestly that we've maintained professional boundaries and mostly avoid each other, which seems to be working fine for both of us. Valerie nods and makes a note on her tablet, then mentions that Selma completed her required training on workplace privacy and hasn't had any further complaints. She asks if I feel good about the outcome of the complaint process, and I say yes because it's true. The formal warning and training felt like real accountability through proper channels rather than just gossip or personal drama. Valerie seems satisfied with my answers and tells me she's glad things have stabilized. She mentions that my upcoming transfer is a good opportunity for a fresh start, and I agree while thinking about how much more complicated the situation is than she probably knows. The meeting ends after 20 minutes, and I walk back to my desk feeling like I've officially closed the HR chapter of this whole mess. Saturday brings another visit to the tree I planted in my parents' backyard, but this time I'm not just sitting with grief. I bring a notebook and spend time thinking about what I actually want my life to look like in 6 months, a year, 5 years from now. I write down things like meaningful work where I feel challenged and valued, healthy relationships with people who respect boundaries, and the ability to process hard emotions without turning them into weapons against other people. It feels possible now in a way it didn't 2 months ago when everything was raw and angry. The tree has grown a little bit since I planted it, new leaves appearing on branches that looked dead at first. I sit there for over an hour just thinking and writing, letting myself imagine a future that isn't defined by what Selma did or what I did in response. My mom brings me coffee halfway through and sits with me for a few minutes without asking questions, which I appreciate. When I finally head inside, I feel lighter somehow, like I've given myself permission to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. Monday afternoon brings my final session with Kendra, and we spend most of it talking about maintenance and what tools I'm taking forward from therapy. She asks me to list the biggest things I've learned, and I tell her I can separate justified anger from destructive revenge now, or at least I understand the difference even when it's hard. I've learned to use proper channels for holding people accountable instead of just plotting personal payback. I've learned that grief needs to be processed directly, instead of channeled into hurting the people who hurt me. Kendra nods and asks how I feel about everything that happened with Selma, and I tell her it will always be complicated. What she did was wrong and violated my trust during the worst moment of my life. What I did was calculated to publicly humiliate her, and involved innocent people who didn't deserve to be used. Both things are true at the same time, and I have to live with that messy reality. Kendra says that level of self-awareness is actually pretty advanced, and most people never get there. She tells me I'm starting my new position Monday with clear boundaries, real friendships with people like Brooks and Rachel, and a commitment to building a life defined by my values rather than my wounds. I leave her office feeling ready for whatever comes next, knowing I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to be better than I was.